You ever hear about those places people swear existed when they were kids, but no one can ever find proof of them? A restaurant chain that nobody remembers except you. A weird show on TV that you can't dig up any trace of. Sometimes you wonder if you just imagined it, or if your memory's playing tricks on you. But other times, it feels darker than that, like something deliberately erased itself, leaving only whispers behind. That's what Uncle Gerry's family fun zone is. If you grew up anywhere near where I did, you might have heard about it. Some people swear it was real. Others swear it was just an urban legend, passed around schoolyards to freak kids out. But if you bring it up to the right crowd, you'll see that look. Half fear, half recognition. Like you've just unlocked a door in their head they never wanted to open again. Uncle Gerry's family fun zone was supposed to be this family entertainment place back in the late 70s or early 80s. A sort of indoor play center, tucked away in the woods. The kind of spot parents would take their kids on weekends. It had ball pits, slides, jungle gyms, even a mascot, Uncle Gerry, who, depending on who you ask, was either a cheerful clown in suspenders or a guy in a dusty old farmer's outfit. Nobody really remembers clearly. The whole thing has this foggy, dreamlike haze around it. But here's the thing, no one can find records of it ever existing. No business licenses, no newspaper ads, no photos, nothing. And yet, everybody who tells the story swears up and down that it was real. And that's where the legend starts getting darker. Because the most common story, the one that always comes up when you mention Uncle Gerry's, is about the boy who went missing. According to the tale, there was this little kid, maybe 4 or 5 years old, who was playing in the big ball pit. His mom turned her back for just a second, and when she looked again, he was gone. The staff shut everything down. Parents were screaming. The whole ball pit got emptied out, but the kid wasn't there. What they found instead was a trap door. Yeah, a hidden hatch right at the bottom of the pit. It led to some kind of crawl space. Some say they climbed down, expecting to find the boy hiding. But all they found was a shoe. No boy, and no way out. Just this suffocating little tunnel that dead-ended in darkness. The kid was never seen again. And not long after, Uncle Gerry's family fun zone just disappeared. Uncle Gerry himself, gone. The building, abandoned, locked up, and then, depending on who you ask, burned down, demolished, or left to rot. Nobody really agrees on what happened next. It's like the whole thing just folded in on itself, leaving behind a story no one could pin down. For years I thought it was just a campfire story, but then, a few years back, I had a conversation with a guy named Will, and it changed everything. See, Will swore he and his friend Caroline actually found the place. Not just in a story, not just in memory, but in the flesh. And after talking to him, I believe it. Will wasn't the kind of guy to go chasing ghost stories. He wasn't into horror movies, didn't hang around on conspiracy forums, nothing like that. He was more of a researcher type, the kind of guy who liked to dig through archives and piece together old histories of forgotten neighborhoods. Caroline, though, she was the opposite. She thrived on creepy stories, and she loved getting under people's skin with them. The two of them met in college, and Caroline had always been the one to push Will into adventures he wouldn't have tried otherwise. According to him, she was the one who first brought up Uncle Gerry's family fun zone. She swore she remembered it from her childhood, remembered the smell of the popcorn machine, the weird low hum of the fluorescent lights, and even the way the statues looked. The statues were what stuck with her the most. They weren't cartoon mascots like you'd expect from a kid's place. They were fiberglass farm animals, goats, cows, sheep, but they weren't on all fours. They stood upright, like people, their arms stretched out wide, not in a welcoming hug, but in this stiff, unnatural gesture, like a mannequin caught mid-sway. Caroline remembered walking past them as a kid and feeling sick to her stomach, because the longer you looked at them, the more wrong they seemed. Will thought she was exaggerating. Maybe it was some cheap play center with bad decorations. Maybe Caroline's childhood memories were just distorting it. But she was insistent, and the more she talked about it, the more other people chimed in. Some of their friends swore they'd heard of it too. A guy Will knew from his hometown even claimed he went there once as a kid and had nightmares for weeks after. But every time Will tried to find proof, records, flyers, anything, there was nothing. It was like the place had been scrubbed from existence. That would have been the end of it. Another dead-end legend. But then one night, Will told me, Caroline came back from a library trip looking pale as a sheet. She said she'd been talking to an older man while combing through the microfilm machine for old newspapers. She mentioned Uncle Gerry's family fun zone offhand, not really expecting a reaction. But the man froze. She said his hand actually shook while he adjusted his glasses.
"You don't want to be asking about that place?"
he told her. When she pressed him, he scribbled something down on a scrap of paper and slid it across the table. He didn't say anything else, just packed his things and left. On the paper were directions. Not an address, not GPS coordinates, just a set of handwritten, almost rambling instructions. He wrote,
"Take the county road north until the third dirt turnoff. Look for the trees marked with red paint. Go past the old Miller farm. Follow the creek until you see the fence with the broken post."
Caroline was ecstatic. Will was skeptical, but deep down, he admitted to me he wanted to see for himself. The next weekend, they set out. Caroline said it felt like chasing a ghost. Every step of the way, the directions seemed like they shouldn't lead anywhere. And yet somehow they did. The dirt roads turned where they were supposed to. The painted trees were still faintly visible. Even the creek still flowed in the exact direction the note described. And then they saw it. Through a break in the trees, standing like it had been waiting for them all this time, was Uncle Gerry's family fun zone. It shouldn't have been there. Not after all these years. But it was. The building looked like an oversized barn, with red paint peeling in long strips. A sun-bleached sign hung over the door. The letters faded, but still just barely legible. "Welcome to Uncle Gerry's." Caroline swore the air around the place felt heavier, like walking into a room right after someone's been arguing, where the tension still hangs, thick and unspoken. Will wanted to turn back. He said every instinct in his body screamed that they weren't supposed to be there. But Caroline? She was already at the door. And so, against his better judgment, he followed her inside. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It wasn't the musty rot of an old abandoned building. It wasn't even the sour mold you'd expect in a place left to decay. No, it was something else. Something strangely sterile, almost metallic, like a hospital corridor that hadn't been cleaned properly. It made his throat tighten. Inside, the air was thick with dust motes that danced in the beams of sunlight slipping through the cracks in the wood. The floor creaked under their weight, and looming in the corners, exactly as Caroline remembered, were the fiberglass animals. Goats, cows, sheep. Their paint had darkened with time, cracked in places, but their glassy eyes still gleamed in the dim light. They all stood on two legs, arms frozen in that grotesque reaching gesture. Caroline whispered,
"See? I told you."
Will didn't answer. He just stared at the statues, the way they seemed almost alive in the shifting shadows. He swore he could smell something burning when he got close to one, a faint, acrid scent like plastic singeing. He pulled back before he touched it, but Caroline was undeterred. She was already moving deeper inside, past the crumbling ticket counter and the faded posters on the wall. The air grew colder the deeper they went. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, like the sound wasn't bouncing back the way it should. And then, at last, they found it. The ball pit. It sat in the center of a wide, open room. The plastic balls were dulled with age. A rainbow faded into shades of grime. But what struck Will most was how neat it looked. There wasn't dust on top, no collapsed beams, no animal nests. The rest of the building was rotting, but the ball pit looked like it had been cleaned. Caroline stared at it, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Will and said quietly,
"This is it. This is where it happened."
Will didn't need to ask what she meant. He already knew, and then Caroline crouched down, brushed the surface of the pit with her hand, and whispered,
"Help me move these."
Will didn't want to touch the ball pit. He swore the air was colder around it, like a draft seeping up from below, even though the floor was sealed. But Caroline was already digging her hands into the faded plastic spheres, pushing them aside with frantic energy. Reluctantly, he joined her. The balls clattered and rolled across the floor as they cleared them away, revealing the grimy tarp lining at the bottom. At first, it was just sticky and unpleasant, nothing more than the residue of decades. But then, with a hollow clunk, Caroline's hand hit something solid. She froze.
"Will, help me."
Together they pushed the remaining balls aside, and there it was. A hatch, a square panel of wood, edges reinforced with iron, almost invisible under the tarp. Caroline's hands trembled as she brushed it clear, revealing a rusted handle set into the center. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence was so thick, Will swore he could hear his own pulse pounding in his ears. Finally, Caroline whispered,
We have to open it.
Will shook his head immediately.
No way. We're done. We saw it, we proved it's real. That's enough.
But Caroline wasn't listening. She wrapped her fingers around the handle and pulled. The hatch resisted at first, groaning like something that hadn't been touched in years. Then, with a violent snap of the rusted hinges, it yawned open. A wave of air rolled out, wet, sour, suffocating. It smelled like earth, like mold, like something that had been shut away and left to rot. Caroline gagged, covering her nose. But when she aimed her flashlight down, her eyes lit up with something Will would later describe as obsession. A narrow wooden ladder led into darkness. The walls below looked cramped, closing in tight, like the throat of a cave. Will said no. He said it over and over again. But Caroline had already set one foot on the ladder. And the moment her flashlight beam disappeared into that black throat, Will knew he had no choice but to follow. The crawl space was worse than anything Will had imagined. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against his skin. The wooden walls were damp and slimy, leaving smears of grime on his palms whenever he steadied himself. The space was so tight he had to crouch, his back scraping the ceiling as he shuffled forward behind Carolyn. Every sound was amplified. The drip of water, the groan of old wood, the ragged wheeze of his own breath. His flashlight beam cut only a few feet ahead, illuminating walls that seemed to pulse with shadows. This is where they found the shoe. There, half buried in the mud at their feet, was a tiny rotted sneaker. The sight froze him, not because of what it meant, but because of how fresh it looked. The mud clung wet and dark to the fabric, as if it hadn't been sitting there for decades, as if it had only just been dropped. Caroline bent to pick it up, but before her fingers touched the laces, something shifted above them. A heavy creak. Will's blood ran cold. He craned his neck back toward the hatch. It was open. A faint square of light glowed high above them, and then, slowly, a shape blocked it out. Someone was standing at the opening. It just stood there, perfectly still, its shoulders hunched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Will couldn't make out a face, just a silhouette, rimmed in faint light, and then it moved. It leaned forward. Its head jerked side to side like it was sniffing. The sound was wet, ragged, like air forcing its way through ruined lungs. Caroline's hand clamped around Will's wrist. Neither of them dared to breathe. And then it spoke, not loudly, not clearly. Just two words, whispered in a voice that sounded cracked and wrong like it hadn't been used in years.
Not young enough.
Will's stomach dropped. His flashlight shook in his hands. Caroline let out a tiny whimper. The figure stayed there for one impossible moment, its body trembling with each sniff. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it slammed the hatch shut. Caroline yanked his arm.
We have to go. Now.
They scrambled back up the ladder, hands slipping on the damp rungs, hearts pounding in their throats. When they burst into the playroom again, the air felt alive, vibrating with some unseen energy. The fiberglass animals seemed closer now, their painted eyes glinting in the dim light. Will swore one of their heads had turned, just slightly, as he ran past. They didn't stop to look back. They didn't stop until the building was behind them, until the trees swallowed the fun zone whole. And even then, they didn't speak. Not a word. Not until they were miles away, sitting in the safety of Caroline's car, gasping for breath like they'd just escaped drowning. That was the night Will told me he stopped doubting. Uncle Gerry's family fun zone was real, and something was still in there. For a long time, they just sat there in the car, breathing like survivors of a shipwreck. Neither one wanted to say the first word, because speaking it out loud would make it real. Will stared out the windshield at the empty road. His hands shook so badly he had to keep them in his lap to stop Caroline from noticing. She, on the other hand, couldn't stop fiddling with the keyring, turning it over and over, metal clinking in nervous rhythm. Finally, Will broke the silence.
What the hell was that?
Caroline's eyes didn't leave the keys.
I think you already know.
No,
Will snapped.
I don't. It wasn't.
He struggled for words.
People don't sound like that. People don't move like that.
Caroline finally looked at him. Her face was pale, hollow.
That wasn't a person.
They drove home in silence. The world outside the windows looked wrong, off-kilter, like they hadn't really left the fun zone at all, like the dark had followed them, and in some ways it had. The weeks after were the hardest for Will. Caroline buried herself in research, digging up old newspaper clippings, trying to track down other disappearances tied to the fun zone, interviewing anyone who remembered Gerry himself. Will wanted no part of it. He didn't even like hearing the name anymore. Whenever Caroline said it, he flinched, like the word itself was cursed. But Caroline couldn't let it go. She was convinced that what they saw in the crawl space was connected to the missing children, that Uncle Gerry hadn't just been some eccentric businessman who failed to keep the lights on. She believed he had been feeding something old, something wrong. The more she dug, the stranger she became. Will noticed it first in her sleep. She started muttering. At first, just nonsense. Broken sentences, slurred words. But then, the phrases became clear. Not young enough. The same words they heard in the crawl space. Will stopped sleeping over after that. Months passed. Caroline grew thinner, restless. Her apartment filled with maps, string, pins. Every square inch of wall space covered in her hunt for a truth Will desperately wanted to forget. Then one night, Will's phone rang at 3 in the morning. It was Caroline. Her voice was raw, trembling.
I found something.
Will didn't want to hear it. He told her to hang up, to go to sleep, to let it go. But she just kept whispering,
It's not over, Will. It's not over.
The line went dead. The next morning, Caroline's apartment was empty. Not just her, but everything. Clothes, books, notes. It looked like no one had lived there in years. Will reported it. The police filed her as missing, but when he tried to explain about the fun zone, about what they saw that night, he could tell from their faces. They didn't believe him. Maybe they didn't want to. And honestly, Will envied them, because belief meant remembering, and remembering meant never sleeping easy again. The last time Will saw Caroline was 6 months later. Not in person, but on a VHS tape. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, just his name, written in shaky block letters. The tape was grainy, flickering with static. The timestamp in the corner suggested it had been recorded weeks before he received it. The video showed the crawl space, the same cramped wooden tunnel they had climbed into that night. The camera swayed, clutched in someone's hand, and then Caroline's voice whispered from behind the lens.
See? I told you. It's still here.
The camera tilted down. In the mud was another shoe, small, new, fresh. And then, something moved. A shadow, shifting just beyond the edge of the flashlight beam. The camera froze. Caroline's breathing grew fast, shallow. And then, slowly, the figure from before stepped into view. Bent shoulders, tilted head, that jerking, unnatural motion. But this time, the voice was clear, stronger, hungrier.
You brought me another.
The tape cut to static. Will hasn't heard from Caroline since. Sometimes, late at night, Will swears he hears scratching at his window, a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. And sometimes when he dreams, he sees the crawl space. He smells the rot. He feels the mud sucking at his shoes. And always, he hears that voice. Not young enough. So, would you visit Uncle Gerry's family fun zone? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dives into horror and folklore, and join me next time as we uncover another terrifying tale. Until then, remember, the next time you're driving past some forgotten roadside attraction, an abandoned arcade, a rotting play center, a place that shouldn't be standing anymore, remember this story, because some places don't die when the doors close. They just wait.